Hello everyone, welcome to another Book Review Wednesday, and today I thought it would be interesting to sort of combine something that is a little bit more traditional but is within sort of poetry form compared to The Nightmare Before, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which is sort of a story within a poem, whereas this is sort of just straight up poetry. I also consider it to be a work of literature because it seems to be the most widely known out of the Christmas books and sort of stories out there, even though it doesn't really follow a complete narrative. And I think it's one of the ones that has stood out over the years, and people seem to. So, without further ado, I'm going to be discussing what the title says: A Visit from St. Nicholas. Now, this poem was written in 1823 by Clement Clarke Moore, and he first published it anonymously, but then in 1837 he finally acknowledged, I made it, I wrote it. So that's sort of an interesting kind of way of putting history, especially when there's been tons of authors that have sort of remained anonymous and then suddenly come out of nowhere. But basically, Clement did borrow from some more traditional sort of Christmas stories. Again, we have the reference of St. Nicholas, sort of the original kind of Santa Claus name. We have, the concept of him having a sleigh, and all those kinds of things are somewhat stem from the sort of European tradition and European understanding of Santa Claus or St. Nicholas. But I feel like it still has certain aspects that sort of branch away and what ultimately sort of result in the kind of American version of Santa Claus. You will see Santa Claus described fairly in-depthly within the poem. You will see sort of what he ends up doing for Christmas, which is again going through and down every chimney and putting the toys there and basically going up the chimney and going on to the next house. It really describes to the audience literally our American sort of interpretation of Santa Claus. In sort of a nutshell, and I find it very fascinating that this was written in the 1800s and early 1800s at that. So again, it sort of shows you sort of how old, and maybe for some watching over in Europe, how young the United States is. But it has a lot of interesting elements within the poem, and it really tries to set a scene. That's really what the poem is about. It's trying to establish sort of the tradition of the holiday of Christmas, but at the same time kind of giving you a sense of the atmosphere, of the feeling. And I think this is why this poem has stood out so much over the years, is because it has such a way with words and conveying in a short amount of time sort of the understanding that we have for Christmas. And again, this doesn't have a huge moral or any big questions answered or a plot, but it still, I think, conveys something that is interesting because it doesn't stem because it stems away from what we traditionally associate with Christmas and just sort of gives you Christmas plain and simply in sort of a kind of fantasy format, as opposed to trying to showcase a moral, which you will see, for example, in How the Grinch Stole Christmas, A Christmas Carol, all those kinds of stories, It's a Wonderful Life. They all display some kind of moral emphasis. Whereas a simple poem like this just reflects to you the the simple joy and the kind of wonder that's associated with the holiday and how that's sort of conveyed within the American culture. And I find it to be very fascinating. It's a very interesting look into Santa Claus and what what we consider to be really a part of the holiday. And usually, you always hear those last lines of the poem, um, where basically Santa's going away and he's like, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all good night." It's something that we remember, I think, till this day. And I think it's sort of ingrained within us. And again, they do kind of emphasize it within books, because certain versions of this story show you sort of what's happening in the scene, like in a children's book, so to speak. So even though it's written within a poem, it can still be broken down and displayed in sort of a book format. Sort of similar to, again, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, except with How the Grinch Stole Christmas, we have a plot, we have a moral, we have characters. Whereas here, we just kind of get an understanding of Santa Claus and kind of get a feeling of the holiday as opposed to a complete narrative. And that's why I find this one to be so unique. It's so simple, but yet it still remains to, I think, be so profound because it conveys the simplistic and yet interesting aspects that are really associated with Christmas and with this holiday. So I think it's definitely worth a recommendation to read through, to read to your kids, your siblings. It's one that I think we should continue to remember, and I think continue to kind of showcase at this time of year. And it really gives you a sense of picturing Santa, picturing the process that he goes through, picturing that nice chimney with the stockings hung by the chimney with care. Though it really brings out the wholesomeness that I think is associated with the holiday. And again, I think also during the time there was kind of sort of a controversy with Christmas, in particular within the United States, I think within the Protestant community at the time. And usually in order to get behind the kinds of religious aspects associated with Santa Claus, that's why the poem addresses the fact that this is happening on Christmas Eve. And that's kind of too where we sort of get that sort of tradition of having Santa giving the gifts on Christmas Eve, as opposed to giving them on the actual day that celebrates the birth of Jesus. So, yeah, that's kind of what was done to sort of compromise and kind of not put any sort of religious undertone to it. So, I think that's really at the heart of this story, is just to be about sort of the tradition and at the same time the sort of joy behind that kind of tradition that takes place this time of year. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say about the poem. It sort of speaks for itself, and you can find versions of it online. But I find it more fun if you're reading it to someone who's fairly small, or someone who's probably even haven't heard of it. I would definitely recommend to take little kids off the iPads and definitely read them a little nice poem like this, because this is the kind of stuff that is timeless, at least to me. So, I mean, Angry Birds can wait, but something like this poem, I think, kind of comes around only once a year. So it's definitely worth, I think, looking into if you enjoy sort of that little simplistic aspect. Again, if you're into the sort of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, this might also appeal to you as well. But again, if you don't mind the fact of being a lot shorter than How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and also not really conveying a moral or having characters or a storyline, and just being a simple, straightforward, showing you Christmas, then you'll find some enjoyment out of it. I think but I think it still is one of those poems where if you read it to somebody else, it makes it all the more fun. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say about um, this book in particular. I am going to be posting Thursday's and Friday's video tomorrow because I am going to be gone on Friday and Saturday. Now, I don't know when I'll be back Saturday, so I might be able to post the video on Saturday for Saturday, or I may not. It really depends on the schedule, but I'll be sure to have it uploaded at some point on Sunday, if that be the case. And if not, then I'll have it uploaded on Saturday. But 3 videos in one day is almost too much for me, especially when I have work. But 2 I can definitely handle. It's just 3 is kind of pushing the limit for me. So yeah, expect 2 videos tomorrow, and maybe Saturday's video will be uploaded on Saturday, maybe not, depending. But I think that's really all I can say. But if, again, there are any questions, comments, concerns, be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.